When you're deploying with Lambda, you often have to manage multiple environments, including Gamma, prod, development, etc. It's important to know how to handle your staged developments, and it's important to be able to manage them in an orderly fashion. What we're going to be covering today is stage deployment for your Lambda functions. Let's go ahead and jump right in with the question for today.
So today's question we're going to be covering around Lambda stage deployments. We'll discuss why this is important as we go along with the question. Let's dive right into the question today. So we have a developer building a web application that uses Amazon API Gateway. The developer wants to maintain different environments for development and production workloads. The API will be backed by an AWS Lambda function with two aliases, one for dev and one for prod. How can the developer maintain these environments with the least amount of configuration? So let's dissect what's being asked in this question. First, we were interested in a web application using API Gateway, and we need to make two deployment stages. We need dev and prod, using Lambda for our processing power. So let's look at the optional choices for this question. The first is to create a REST API for each environment and integrate the APIs with the corresponding dev and prod aliases in Lambda. Deploy these APIs with their respective stages and access the APIs using stage URLs. The second one is to create a REST API, integrate the API with the Lambda function using stage variable in place of an alias. Deploy the API in two different stages, dev and prod. Create a stage variable for each stage with different aliases as the values, and access the API using different URLs. The third option is to create a REST API, integrate the API with the dev alias of the Lambda function, deploy the API to the dev environment, and configure a canary release deployment for the prod environment where the canary will integrate with the Lambda prod alias. The last option is to create a REST API, integrate the API with the prod alias of the Lambda function, deploy the API to prod environment, configure a canary release deployment for the dev environment where the canary will integrate with the Lambda dev alias. So the option that we're looking to solve this one is actually going to be B, to create the REST API and integrate it with the API using stage variables in place of the aliases. So let's look at the options that we didn't choose. What you'll notice here is a common theme is that B was simpler solution. While we're able to do A, is time consuming and error prone. It's more complex of a solution. C and D are using canary releases, which are simply more complex. So let's dive into why B was the right answer. So you're creating your REST API and you're integrating it with your Lambda functions by using a stage variable in place of an alias. We already looked at this verbiage from the question. So that this is the best option because it's the simplest and most straightforward out of the four options that we had available to us. It's also the easiest to maintain. By using a stage variable, the developer can integrate dev and prod with the Lambda function without having to make any changes to the API. And this can obviously save you some time and effort as well. An invoke example I gave here is you would use the API name along with a postfix with the URL that you're looking to use. Let's look about how you would implement this. So I've gone ahead and put the steps here on the screen. So we create our REST API. We're going to integrate that API with a Lambda function using a stage variable. We're going to deploy the API in two stages, both dev and prod. And we're going to create a stage variable in each stage with different aliases for the values. And finally, you're going to access this API using the different URLs that we created. I've gone ahead and created a demo that we can walk through how to implement this. Let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. So that sums up using Lambda stage deployment that we were looking at to answer this AWS question. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them below and we'll be happy to follow up with you.